All right, so this is a little show about a trip that Pam and I took to Roatan back at the end of last summer. For any of you who are unfamiliar with where Roatan is, it's obviously showing the Caribbean here, and Roatan is off the coast of Honduras. So Roatan is this long, skinny island here. It is part of Honduras. Here's an aerial satellite view of the island. And this is roughly the area where the resort that we stayed at, Anthony's Key Resort, is located. You zoom in, take a look at the resort, and so the main part of the resort, the dining hall and the dive facilities and all that, is here on the island of Roatan, and then the place where we stayed is on this little island. It's a very short distance away. So all these are little cabins that we stayed in, and I think ours is this one right here. So there's a boat that acts as a shuttle between the two 24 hours a day, and if you want to cross, you just walk down to the dock, and if the boat's there, you just hop in and they run you across. If they're on the other side, there's a big bell that you ring, and when you ring the bell, then the guy immediately comes across and runs you over. So this is on the main island looking over towards the island where we stayed, and then this is a little video showing looking from the island back the other direction. So you can see all the dive boats. Just Anthony's by itself has something like 17 dive boats, and then there's a bunch of other resorts as well that have dive boats. And this is looking back towards dining hall and that main buildings. Here's our dive boat. So not very big boats, but really well designed, and got these nice covers to keep you out of the sun. Pretty much was able to get by without putting sunscreen on most of the time down there, just because it was up front where we were under the cover all the time. And this is during a dive. So each dive I was led by the same dive master. So he would kind of lead the group around to the different parts of the reefs and so on. And this is kind of the way the other divers, they'd all cluster around and follow the dive master, and tended to go faster than what we liked. Pam and I like to go kind of slow and look at the little stuff and take time and take pictures, and so we were always trailing kind of way behind everybody. We'd stop and be taking pictures of something and then have to look up and see where they were, the 100-foot visibility or so we'd see them off in the distance and go take it off, catch up with them, and then stop and look at something. So it was kind of a little frustrating in the sense that you couldn't really take it at our own pace. So here we are with our cameras. One of the things about being in the tropics, there's a number of things that are very different than what we're used to around here. One is kind of lack of tides, or very minor tides that they have. So whereas around here we have 12, 14-foot exchanges. Oftentimes down there, big exchange is 1 foot either direction from zero. So not a lot of intertidal to look at, and at that particular location, there wasn't a lot of kind of beach that you could go on anyway. Really rough, sharp coral stuff, coral rock left behind. That here were some narrateds, kind of guessing on the species. They were just out of reach, so I couldn't pull one off and see what the aperture looked like in terms of the teeth. But my guess is that it was this versicolor. Another thing that's very different is we're accustomed to seeing, large kelps and leafy kinds of kelps, and those are just non-existent. So algae is present, but it's present in much harder to reach or tougher forms. So of course a lot of the primary production is from symbiotic algae that's living in the corals that are down there. But there are some seaweeds, but they're like these guys that we're seeing here. These are have a lot of very calcareous. They're very super tough algae. So you can see a couple different kinds here. And another one here. One particularly cool one is this one called the sea pearl. There's a couple of them here, but oftentimes you just see an individual one. And what's really cool about these, besides, they look cool too, but they are one single cell. So it's one of the largest single-celled organisms in the world. And these things are about the diameter of a quarter or so. They really stand out. They're very striking. They kind of look like these eyeballs looking at you from the reef. There are some algae that are growing that are softer, more like kind of fuzz sort of algae. And of course, as soon as these crop up, they get chomped off by all these herbivorous fishes that are around. So algae, other than these kind of tough ones that you saw, you just don't see other ones. But one place where they do grow is in little patches that are cultivated essentially by some of the damselfish. So somebody like this little bicolor damselfish will have his own little patch of algae growing on the reef, and he'll guard it from other fish and even divers. You get too close to his patch and he thinks you're after his precious algae, and he'll come out and nip you and stuff. Another big contrast is the kind of lack of starfish. Here in the Northwest, we're in the kind of epicenter of sea star diversity, and we go out on the beach and we see several kinds. We go diving and see a bunch more. In the 14 or 15 dives that Pam and I did down there, we didn't see a single sea star except for this one that we saw snorkeling. So just one individual of one species. And it's not that, they have sea stars and they got, wiped out by a wasting disease or something like that, like some of the ones around here have been reduced. It's just the diversity of them is just an order of magnitude or more less than it is up here. Things that are really diverse, though, are the sponges. One of the kind of major things taking up space on hard surfaces down there are the seemingly infinite varieties of sponges. There's lots of different kinds. I didn't try to put names on all of them um, since they are notoriously hard to identify. Um, so I just have names on some of the really obvious, easy ones. And of course, sponge morphology can change dramatically from a high current, high surge area to one that is not so strong water motion. So can't just go by shape on these things. Sometimes they'll be, very flattened in one place and have all kinds of parts that stick up in another and it'd be the same species. We have some of these kind of long tubular sponges like this. Here's another one. It's more of an encrusting sponge. And of course, sponges having these holes in them make nice little cavities for things to hide in as well. A lot of the sponges down there kind of luminesce almost. They have this just super intense blue color that is hard to kind of capture on the camera. But this picture kind of shows it pretty well. Just how intense blue some of them look. They had a lot of what they call barrel sponges. These guys with the really large openings, and these giant barrel sponges. Excuse me. Like this one was literally big enough for a diver to get into. Obviously, they very much frown on people doing anything like that because they're too easily damaged by people posing for pictures in them and stuff. So you would get in big trouble if they caught you doing that. But this gives you an idea of just how huge some of these sponges are. And of course, sponges feed by drawing water in through the sides of these walls here. They have microscopic openings that draw water in, and it's filtered, and then the water comes out this large opening in the front. So they make for a good hiding place for things. You can imagine you've got a nice shelter, plus you have nice fresh seawater circulating through. Sponges have been described as being, what was it, something like nasty tasting gristle embedded with glass shards, because they've got all these little microscopic spicules in them that they're basically sharp pointed pieces of glass, and then they have nasty chemicals that they use for their own defense. So there's not a lot of things that eat sponges. There's a few fish that graze on them, and then there's some of the sea turtles feed on them, particularly the hawksbill sea turtle. This one you can see here. And so this guy was sort of nibbling away at something when I first came upon him, and then he decided he didn't like being filmed and took off. one thing I didn't notice at the time, and it wasn't until I was putting a presentation together that I noticed that he actually has a tag right here on his flipper. So here's another really common sponge that we saw there, the pink face sponge. It's got this kind of unusual margin to it with the little finger-like things connected by clear tissue. And like I said, these sponges are kind of nice habitat for things. So we have this four-eyed butterfly fish that was kind of, as I'd approach him, he'd sink down into the sponge, and then I'd back off and he'd come back out and he'd kind of go up and down. He's using it as shelter. Here's a little juvenile fish hiding down inside of this sponge. Something else here, but I can't make out what it is. This red thing here. This was a sponge that Pam came across. Again, it's one of these vase type sponges, quite large. Actually, a giant barrel sponge, actually. And kind of down out of reach in the bottom of this were a whole bunch of shells, all occupied by hermit crabs. So you can see a variety of different species there. And but she couldn't reach in there far enough to pull them out to get a closer look. This one is kind of cool. So here we have a coral that's being kind of overgrown by this red boring sponge. And then all of these speckles on the red boring sponge are a type of zoanthid anemone. So if we look at this next slide here, so this is a different kind of sponge with a different kind of zoanthid growing on it. But so these zoanthids are like little miniature anemones. They're connected to each other by tissue at the base of them. You can't see here, but they're kind of poking up through this brown sponge. Of course, the other major structural thing in the tropics like this are the corals. And this is a elkhorn coral. This is about 8 feet across the crown of this. This is a coral that is currently suffering from some disease problems. I'll talk about that later. So there's not as much of it there as one would hope, but and of course sponges come in all different sorts of shapes. This is a plate coral, as the name implies, very thin, flat. Some of these can be quite large as well. Maze coral with all these weird ridges running around on them. So just lots of different shapes, lots of different colors. Here's a lettuce coral, and as you can imagine, this makes for really nice hidey holes for little fish and shrimps and other crabs and all sorts of things. So the zoanthus we saw earlier was one that grows just on that brown sponge. This is one that grows kind of on whatever rock space you can find. And you can kind of see they look like little sea anemones, but they're colonial. And see this is tissue that's connecting all of the different polyps in the colony. So again, around here, we're accustomed to going out and seeing sea anemones all over the place. Really not that many sea anemones, and the ones that are there tend to be pretty pretty hard to spot. There were some ones with little kind of curly tentacles that would be scrunched way down inside the reef things with just a little bit of them showing. This looks like a sea anemone, but it's actually what we call a corallomorph. So it's basically like a really large coral that does not have a hard exoskeleton like the reef building corals or the cup corals. And another type of coral, of course, are the sea fans and gorgonians. So those are sea fans, of course, are these ones that are big, flattened like a fan, like this guy here, and then more conventional gorgonians of the more cylindrical kinds of structures. Here's a close-up of a sea fan, or I guess one of the other sea gorgonian, because it's not all in the same plane. But these are in a group called the octo corals, octo 8, referring to the fact that each of these little polyps has 8 tentacles. So any of the gorgonians, sea fans, any of those guys, you look up close, if the polyps are out, you can see the little 8 tentacles on them. Whereas on the hard corals, like the elkhorn coral that you saw, or brain coral or something like that, they have a lot more than 8 tentacles. And of course, there are a number of things that live on and feed on the different octocorals. Here we see a couple flamingo tongue snails. Those of you who are familiar with the shell, you know that it's a pretty drab. I mean, it's just a pure white, sort of cowrie-like shell. But the live animal has this beautiful kind of leopard spot pattern on its mantle, and the mantle envelops the shell. And these are feeding on the octocoral here. These don't show up really well, but it's one of the few bivalves that we saw down there. These are Atlantic wing oysters. So you got a little bit of a head-on view of one that's a little bit open here, and then this one. So there's got this really prominent spike coming out next to the hinge back here. So several specimens attached to this gorgonian. Gorgonians are also a handy place for seahorses to hang out. They can wrap their little prehensile tail around the stalks on these things. Seahorses are surprisingly hard to find. The ones that we saw, the dive master pointed out, and since they're diving every day, they kind of know where to find things where something was yesterday. Something like a seahorse is probably not going to go very far in one day, so they can kind of go back to the same spot and generally locate it. So they kind of know the things that divers like to see, like seahorses, and so they know where to zero in on them. Here's a little snail. It was kind of deep in the little bit of algae here. Again, a lot of these snails, there were a number of them that I took pictures of that, they were so covered with material that I couldn't really tell what they were. This kind, this stocky cerith, the ones I saw seem to generally be pretty clean, so I could be fairly confident of the identification. We only saw one sea slug, this lettuce sea slug, and it was one that was, again, pointed out by the dive master. And then the group took off really fast, and so we had very little chance to get pictures of it, and so they didn't come out very good, but kind of gives you an idea what it looks like here. There's also a fair number of different kinds of tube worms on the reef. It's a close-up of one of many. And of course, all these little red dots on the radials are eyes. Another fairly common one are the Christmas tree worms. They have a nice two sets of radials with basically look like little Christmas trees. And these are in holes that go right down into the coral and the coral rock. So these holes, the worm pulls in, they're like half the diameter of a pencil or something. They're really small holes. And when the worm dies, the little things called tube blennies that will then use them as habitat. And so you get these tiny, tiny, long, skinny fish that will live inside of the tubes in these coral heads. Of course, most of the time our attention was directed at the reef itself because that's where a lot of the critters are, but of course there's a lot of fish free swimming as well. Some of them come in and sort of make quick pass by you and you catch your attention, but I know we both miss out on a lot of the larger fish that are out swimming in the open water because we were spending so much time looking at the stuff that's on the reef itself. But most dives we would see at least one or two of these yellowtail snappers that would come cruising by. Another one we saw a lot, almost every time you turn and look out at the water, would be these black durgeons. It's a type of triggerfish, and these are really hard to get a good photograph of. They basically look like solid black footballs as they go by, and they never get too close, and they're so black they just soak up all of the light from the flash. Of a fast, free, open blue water sort of fish that come by in schools every once in a while were the horse-eyed jacks. Another one like that yellowtail snapper that would frequently come by and sort of check you out were these dog snappers. And we did see a couple barracuda. So this is the largest of the barracuda, great barracuda. And you can see one of those black durgeons in the background here. This one had a shark sucker on it. So it's a fish that's very much like a remora, and it's got a suction cup on its head and attaches to a larger fish or a sea turtle, or in this case, barracuda. One of the places that a lot of people tend to overlook in terms of going to the tropics, diving on reefs, is oftentimes don't pay much attention to the kind of open sand areas. And there's actually a lot of life in those as well. And we did get to spend a little bit of time looking at a few of the things out on the open sand away from the reef. These are yellow goatfish. They're called goatfish because they got these little whiskers, these barbels that they stick down and wiggle around in the sand to try to locate any kind of buried invertebrate that they can slurp up. There's also sort of the perception that you're in the tropics, so everything is going to be really fancy and colorful. And there's actually a lot of very super drab kind of fish, especially when you get out in the sand, because you want to be able to blend in as well as possible. So there were a lot of different kinds of gobies, like this Sand Canyon goby. And some of these are kind of hard to tell or hard to identify because there's very little difference between them. It might be just one little spot or something on them that gives you a visual for distinguishing one species from another. We came across this neat little pipefish out on the sand. And of course, pipefish is relative to the seahorses. It's a very seahorse-like head on them, but it's like a seahorse that's been stretched out into a long, skinny fish. These sailfin blennies, you can see his little burrow that he has behind him. He's come out and he's showing off to the ladies here by raising up his big fin and waving around. We came across a nice big queen conch out on the sand flats. The only other place we saw this was when we went snorkeling in a seagrass bed. But this one was actually quite deep. This was at, I want to say, it was below 60 feet. And flip it over, and nice, beautiful pink aperture on it. And these guys have the strangest eyes. You can see the eye peering over the edge here. And here's a close-up of his eyeballs. Kind of cool, kind of creepy at the same time. It's very kind of strange, you know, being looked at by a snail for some reason. I'm not sure why, but also out on the deep sand was some very large hermit crabs. I think this one is in some kind of tulip shell here. And the one behind is in a queen conch. So this giant hermit hermit is bigger than any of the hermit crabs that we have around here. Um, they get big enough to live in the largest queen conch shells, so it gives you an idea just how large this species gets. This is a good example of just how grody a lot of these um, shells can be. Um, so used to seeing them in collections and stuff, and they look all beautiful with all the crud cleaned off of them, but out in the wild, they oftentimes blend in very well. This looks, just like a chunk of old dead coral rock sitting on the sand, but it's actually this, well, I'm pretty sure it's a Caribbean base shell. And over, you can see a lot cleaner on this side since this doesn't get all the algal growth, but another thing we found out on the sand were these little moon snail, presumably moon snail egg collars. Never saw the snail that produces them, but this thing is only about the diameter of a quarter or so. Got this cool little fluted edges on it. Very different from the great big ones we find on the beaches around here. Another one of the critters that the dive masters keep track of so they know where to take divers to show them are the large mantis shrimps. So out in these sand areas, there's just burrows with this very large mantis shrimp, and of course these guys feed on fish and shrimp and things like that they spear with their large frontal raptorial appendages. So here's a heart urchin. Actually, when I found this, there was just a little bit of it showing, maybe about this big of the top that was showing above the sand. But I pulled it out mainly to see if it had commensal pea crab living on it, because these frequently do. And sure enough, on the underside here, we see this little Disodactylus. So there's a pair of them that live on each urchin, male-female pair. And these guys are tiny. This is less than half an inch across. So I mentioned earlier how the algae there is quite different and quite tough. One of the coolest ones is this one called a pinecone alga, which is, I mean, what a perfect name for it. Not quite sure how they're anchored in the sand, but they are. They got a little stalk that goes down into the sand, and then they just look like a green pine cone. Really, really, really cool algae. There were some open areas that had more of a cobble sort of bottom to them, and in these areas we would see these yellowhead jawfish, which have kind of vertical burrows in these areas, and they raise up and look around. This is kind of cool, guys, in that the males actually brood the eggs in their mouth, and they'll come up and have these big cheekfuls, big mouthful of eggs, kind of all in a clustered together in a ball, and they'll kind of spit them out so they spin around a bit in the water, and then suck them back in so that they kind of aerate, clean them. tried to wait around for one of them to do that, and I the group moved on too fast. I couldn't outwait him because I wanted to see if I could get a picture of him or a movie of him doing that, but it was not to be. Along the reef, under deeper ledges and things, you come across these bright reddish orange fish. These are squirrel fish, and these are actually nocturnal fish that are just hanging out, waiting for it to get dark again. And you can see they have these really large eyes. They're good for seeing at night. Here's another one, different species. Again, really large eyes. So we did get to do a couple of night dives. So you get a whole different cast of characters that come out at night. All those daytime fish go and hide out in crevices and things, and then different ones like the squirrel fish come out. So it was on a night dive when I found this flame helmet shell. One that was on the front of the dredgings. Most of the hermit crabs that I saw were also at night. You kind of assume that a hermit crab being in a nice shell would be pretty well protected and would be out wandering around in the daytime, but it didn't really seem to be the case too much. Here's another crab that we saw at night. We did see some of these in the daytime as well. It's the arrow crab, and I think the reason why these get by in the daytime is that there's just nothing worth eating on them. These crazy long spindly legs on them and long spindly claws. You know, I mean, how much meat can there be? I always think of it as, it would be like eating toothpicks to get whatever food's left over after somebody used a toothpick or something. I mean, there's just nothing there. So I think it's just not worth the bother for anybody to eat them. There were a lot of these red night shrimp that would come out. Again, big eyes so they can see better at night, and nice deep red color to them, quite abundant. Nighttime's also the right time to see lobsters, spiny lobsters, and they had this, I think, just really spectacular looking spotted spiny lobster down there. Just amazing pattern on these guys. I just love it looking at them. And again, not to beat the point too much, but around here, if there are urchins in an area, they're just kind of sitting out day or night, visible. But in the tropics, you've got things like triggerfish and that are capable of getting past the spines very easily and eating sea urchins. So you tend not to see them at all in the daytime. And so this sea urchin, again, was one that we came across that was out at night. The famous diadema, the long-spined urchin that are just absolutely nasty. This is a little baby one, really, really tiny. But, these get to be quite large. But they've got these crazy long spines. They're just super sharp. You just can't touch them in any way without having one of these spines go in your finger and then break off. And it's got a toxin associated with it as well to make it hurt extra. So again, you'd think that these things would be pretty safe crawling around the reef, but things like triggerfish, can just sit there and clip the spines off, flip them over, and eat them, no problem. So they have to only come out at night. This is a rock boring urchin. So those of you that have been out on the outer coast of Washington or Tongue Point, the Straits, have seen how our purple urchins will over time burrow, make these pits in the rock that they use for shelter. That's what these rock boring urchins do as well. But unlike our purple urchins that just stay in their little pit and catch whatever algae drifts by, these guys actually leave their pit at night, come out, graze on what they can find, and then return to their pit, so they're safe throughout the day. This is a different kind of goatfish than what you saw earlier, spotted goatfish, and it's just out laying on the sand. It's a daytime fish normally, and at night it's inactive and actually changes to a different color than what it is in the daytime. Here's another fish that was a lot easier to photograph at night, as it was just kind of sacked out on the bottom. It's a red hind. Came across this bearded toadfish. So around here, the closest relative is the midshipman, you're probably familiar with. Those are a type of toadfish. This is a much larger toadfish, and just got this crazy, very ornate beard of weird cirri on its chin. The only time you see octopus down there is at night. So this is a Caribbean reef octopus. It's out cruising around looking for food, and this particular species has really well developed webbing between the arms, and so what it'll do is crawl along and select an area and then kind of pounce on that area. Think of it as like a cast net sort of thing. So they'll envelop some coral heads or rocks or whatever in this webbing, and then reach under with the arm tips and probe around to chase out any fish or shrimp or crab or whatever that might be hiding underneath the rubble. This is it's been called speculative feeding, is the scientific term for it. So they don't know for sure that there's something underneath that rock, but it's just speculative. Actually, I hadn't noticed it before, but in the background here, you can see one of those sea pearl algae things that I mentioned earlier, kind of reflecting the light there. But this is a neon goby. This is a really common one that you see just sitting out on tops of coral heads and things. And so obviously, you see a tiny little tasty looking little fish sitting out in the open, and it looks like, well, why isn't somebody eating that? Well, the reason why is because they have other uses for them. So here's a spotted moray, and you can see one of these little neon gobies on him. And so these neon gobies are a type of cleaners. They're if you go in the Indo-Pacific, they have cleaner wrasses that look very much the same. Actually, kind of cool that the cleaner wrasses actually have that same blue, electric blue stripe on them, like this. That tells tells other fish that, hey, don't eat me, I'm a cleaner. But in the Caribbean, it's gobies that do this. And so this guy is on this moray eel. Actually, he's sort of making a house call, because normally what these guys do is they set up a cleaning station on a coral head, and then the other fish come and line up and wait for their turn to be cleaned. And these little cleaners will go in their mouths, around their teeth, go in their gills, pick off any little parasites, clean out any crud between their teeth, kind of a active flossing sort of thing. So this cleaning is actually apparently kind of a good way to make a living in the tropics, because you also, in addition to the cleaner gobies, you have cleaner shrimp. And kind of one of the indications that a shrimp is a cleaner shrimp is that it'll have these bright white antennae that they wave around to sort of attract the fish and let them know that, hey, I'm here, I'm available to clean. This was a particularly frustrating shrimp to photograph. Their bodies are just completely transparent. They just have a few little purple dots here and there along, and we had a hard time getting good photographs of these guys. But and they're very, very, these guys are really, really tiny. Another cleaner shrimp are these banded coral shrimps, and this is a much larger shrimp, and the species is interesting, well, for a couple of reasons. One is that it's a species that's worldwide in the tropics. You go to the Red Sea, you go to Indonesia, whatever, you'll see this species of shrimp. It's the same one everywhere. And the other thing that's cool is that they are monogamous, so male-female pairs live together and stay together. But again, white antennae to signal fish, hey, don't eat me. It's a green moray. This is the largest species of moray down there. They get up to something like 8 or 9 feet long. And this particular one is not well loved, this particular individual. The dive master warned us about this one before the dive. And there she is right before she bit my fin. So yeah, when the dive master was warning us about him, or her, well, I'm not sure they know the sex, but anyway, they did give it a name already. Oops, I mean for it to play again. Apologies to people named Karen, but I didn't name it. That's what the dive masters named it. Not a popular moray with the divers or the dive masters, but nobody knows why she's so ornery. But as soon as we got in the area, she came out of her hidey hole and was checking us out and tasting my fin. There's a lot of good reasons not to put your hand down on surfaces when you're on these tropical reefs. there's a lot of, the coral polyps have nematocysts, have little stingers on them, and it can irritate your skin. A lot of the coral is very sharp, can cut you. And then you also have things like these scorpion fish that have spines, dorsal fins that are made up of spines that have venom in them. And when you look at this guy, it's like, well, yeah, but he stands out like a sore thumb. Well, not really, because at depth, because red light is the first thing that's absorbed, this guy did not look like this without a light shining on him. But, the only reason that you're seeing this red contrasting with the green is because the flash has gone off and it's lit him up. But in reality, he blends in really well. So he's just lying in ambush waiting for some fish to come by that he can ambush. So this kind of illustrates the point a little better. And see how well this guy blends in. It'd be very easy if you're just kind of swimming around looking at things and randomly putting your hand on surfaces to lay your hand on something like this. And you think back to some of that algae I was showing earlier, the little flattened leaves with the little edges on them. Well, actually, there's a little bit here you can see. These fringes on the fish, are a perfect imitation of them. I mean, he's got these little cirri on top that look like stuff that would be growing on a reef. It's just amazing camouflage in these guys. Now, these are not, they're venomous, but they're not going to kill you, not like a stonefish in Australia, but it's not something that you want to get, that you want to mess with. And of course, the fish that most people go there to see are the reef fishes, the really colorful things like the angel fishes and butterfly fishes and stuff like that. So this rock beauty is a nice example of one of the really fancy, cool fish that you see on these things, either snorkeling or scuba diving. These fish, though, in the tropics, everybody's moving so fast. With the exception of something like that scorpion fish that was, laying there waiting to ambush things, or the seahorses, these other fish are zipping around all the time. So these blue chromis, for example, are these gorgeous, just electric blue fish, almost hurt your eyes. They're so bright underwater, and yet they're really frustrating to try to photograph because they're just zipping around constantly on the move. And so you have to keep in mind that a lot of these pictures I'm showing are one of multiple pictures that we took of a particular thing, trying to get a good picture, because nobody ever seems to slow down long enough to get a picture. You get spoiled by the fish around here, that are like a sculpin there, sits there and poses for you, or a rockfish that just kind of hangs motionless. It's a whole different world in the tropics. So this video clip will kind of give you an indication of just how these fish are moving all the time. So these blue tangs are schools moving along here, and they're picking up, looking for stuff on the surfaces of the coral. But you can see how it'd be difficult to frame and shoot a picture of these guys when they're going. Like this. So this is the one good picture I got of one of those guys. So these are a type of surgeonfish. Uh, they're called that because they've got this basically knife blade that folds in back here near their tail as a defensive structure. So if you were to grab this fish, it would slice you really good with this thing. It's got one on each side, obviously. Relative ocean surgeonfish, again, it's got the knife blade. It's got its little switchblade. It can whip out if you make it mad. And I put this picture in just because it's a pretty fish, and I had a hard time getting a good photograph of one of these. It's a fairly common fish, moves in small groups around the reef. Another one that I didn't see a lot of these guys. See them occasionally on a dive, just one or two here and there. But again, it's a hard one to get lined up to cooperate for a photograph. So this four-eyed butterfly fish, obviously the name is reference to the appearance that it has four eyes. It's got, of course, it's two real eyes, and it's got two fake eyes, one on each side back here near the rear. And this is a strategy that you see in a lot of tropical fish, basically to fool a predator into thinking that this is the front end of the fish. And why does that matter? Well, if you've ever held a fish, you know that they slide really well in one direction and not so well the other way, because going from this rear to the front, you've got the scales and you've got these spiny fins and everything, whereas the fish is very streamlined going in this direction. So when a fish is trying to eat another fish, it wants to eat it head first because it slides right down. So if a predatory fish sees this and thinks this is the eye, not only is it going to strike at this end, and if it grabs it, it's going to have a really hard time swallowing. It's also going to expect the fish to try escaping in that direction, whereas instead the fish is going to go this way. So they've got this fake eye, and then their real eye is kind of camouflaged by putting a line through it like this, so it doesn't look so much like breaks up the outline of that circle and makes it look less like a real eye. So again, if these predators are kind of having to strike, very short notice, they see the thing and then they go for it. And so they don't have time to kind of think about it and go, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. They just see this big eye and go for it. Here's a pair of filefish that seem to be going through some kind of courtship routine. This was the yellowish one is the male, and this one's the female. And kind of like the surgeonfish that had the knife back here, these have the really long spine here that they can stick straight up, make themselves very, very, well, much bigger and harder to swallow, and I don't know if there's any toxins associated with that spine, but it's a pretty wicked spine. It also has some really strange hooks back here near the tail that are kind of weird. They sort of face the wrong way. This is a really cute little puffer fish. It's only about an inch long or so. This species does not get large, but if you know pufferfish, you know that they have a couple different defenses. One is that they have a toxin, tetrodotoxin. So if you're familiar with the Japanese dish fugu, that's made from puffer fish. It has to be prepared just the right way, or you can die from eating it. And then, of course, the name puffer, these things, if something tries to eat them anyway, they can draw in either air or water into their belly and swell up to make themselves big and round, and that much harder for something to swallow. Somewhat similar to the puffers are the trunk fish. Instead of swelling up, though, these guys are just encased in a solid thing of armor. So this whole frontal part of the body is one solid, sort of almost like an exoskeleton. So these are, again, very slow-moving fish, but they don't have to go very fast because there's not many things that are going to be able to swallow them, given their shape. So we saw a couple different species of trunk fish there. This is a juvenile longfin damselfish, and again, it's got the fake eye routine going on with it here. The main reason I put this in was because it's a good example of kind of one of the problems you have when you're in the tropics and you're trying to identify fish. A lot of these fish have different coloration patterns between when they're juveniles and when they're adults. And in this particular case, again, this is not a very good picture, but kind of the only one I had to go with. You can see how radically different the adult coloration is. It's lost all the fancy color, and it's just this drab, kind of almost black looking fish as an adult. Another example is the bluehead wrasse. You see a juvenile like this. These juveniles are really, really common. You know, you wonder, well, why are they calling it blue-headed wrasse? I mean, there's no blue there on his head. Well, again, it's a baby. And when it grows up, it's got this nice blue head on it. Here's a juvenile gray angelfish, and really it's a very striking animal. Again, here the eye is black and the surrounding of the thing is black, so it kind of makes it really hard for somebody to orient themselves to which end is which. Is that it's going to be its head or not? It's got this coloration as a juvenile, and then that name gray angelfish, obviously very appropriate for the adults. French angelfish, again, very striking, very dramatic looking animal. And the juvenile looks exactly the same as that baby gray angelfish does. The only difference is the shape of the tail is a little bit different on the two. But otherwise they look the same. But the adults are very, very different. In the shallow water, there are really vast seagrass beds. It's turtle grass, very much like our own eelgrass, except a much tougher consistency to it. So we did spend a little bit of one day, spent some time snorkeling around in here to see what we could find, and we saw, you know, some queen conchs in here. We saw barracuda, a lot of juvenile fish. So like the baby gray angelfish I showed you, that was from when we were snorkeling. There's also their equivalent of our herring. So again, not everything there is fancy and colorful. So they've actually got several species of herring and herring-like fishes there that you can't really distinguish by a photograph. You need to have a specimen in hand to do scale counts and stuff to figure out exactly what species it is. So they kind of lump them all together and call them silver sides. So here's just an idea of what a school of these guys looked like near the eelgrass bed. Oops. Um, this is one of my favorite little guys, fairy basslet. So these are little guys kind of hang out under ledges, and oftentimes they're upside down. They use the underside of the ledge as they kind of pretend that's the bottom, I guess. But just gorgeous little fish, beautiful purple front, yellow behind. So some of these fish like this are having problems in the Caribbean due to the introduction of lionfish from the Indo-Pacific. So a lot of you are probably already familiar with the problem that these guys got loose, and with a lack of native predators to keep them in control, and also little fish like that fairy basslet being naive to these predators, not recognizing them as a threat. So these guys are slurping things down like those smaller fish and reproducing like crazy. And so there's been a lot of different efforts to control them. They'll have lionfish derbies, people go out and spear them, who can get the most pounds of lionfish in a day. And they're good eating, so they don't go to waste. But they are trying a number of different efforts. Even now they're trying to come up with a robot, since divers, can only be in the water so many hours and spend only so much time underwater. They're using AI to getting it to learn what a lionfish looks like and to spear them, kind of a remote control sort of basis. One of the things that Roatan has done is taken a very proactive approach to the lionfish problem, and in that regard, I mentioned how the resort we were at had something like 17 dive boats, and there's a bunch of other dive operations that have boats as well. And so when they take divers out, they tell the divers, if you see a lionfish, tell the dive master, signal it to the dive master. And the dive master will either have a little spear with him at a time and spear it, or he'll make note that there's one in that location, and then the next time he goes back, he'll take care of it. And as a result, the whole time we were down there, Pam and I never saw a single lionfish except for one that the dive master had already seen and had speared. And what they do when they spear them is they give them to one of the local predators. In this case, this is a snapper that this badly injured lionfish is being offered to. And in a way, they're training these fish to eat lionfish. So there he slurped it down. And so it seems to be pretty effective in the sense that, like I said, we didn't see a single one when we were out, other than this one that had already been spotted. So fish like different groupers like this coney and this tiger grouper that didn't previously recognize lionfish as something edible. I mean, obviously they have, these venomous spines on them, and they have this warning pattern coloration on them that kind of says, hey, don't eat me. But, if you get them head first, all the spines fold right back and they slide right down. So now these fish have kind of learned that, hey, I can eat those guys, and kind of have a natural control of them without, making the problem worse by importing a known predator of them. Kind of teaching. I mean, they would have figured it out eventually, I'm sure, but this way they're speeding up the recognition of these things as potential prey, and there's no way that people alone going out and spearing and all that are going to ever completely control the lionfish populations. They need the help from native predators like this. So here's the tiger grouper with a green moray, and these actually do a teamwork sort of thing. So they are out hunting. You may have seen on nature shows where a badger and a coyote will team up to hunt for rodents under rocks and in burrows and stuff, and so the badger will do the digging and chase the thing out, and they end up sharing the meals, or that sort of thing. Well, the same sort of thing with these. Of course, they can't really share a meal, but as they swallow things. But the moray can go under the rocks and chase out fish that are hiding under the rocks from the grouper, and the grouper can grab them. And likewise, the free swimming fish that dart under a rock to escape the grouper can get nailed by the moray. So they have a cooperative agreement kind of going, where they each is using its own strength, its own talents to help out both itself and the other. So in addition to the color changes I showed you earlier with some of these fish going from juveniles to adults, there's also color changes that happen in some of these fish where they undergo either a sex change or a maturation sort of change. So the stoplight parrotfish, this is the normal adult coloration, and so females and males that are kind of lower on the pecking order look like this. And then this is what's called a super male. So this is a kind of the one that is the ruler of that particular area of reef. And so as long as the super male is around, it's the one that is the male mating with the females. If something should happen to it, then one of the ones that was that other color will change over. Whatever the largest, most dominant of the leftovers becomes a super male and undergoes this color change. Parrotfish are grazers, so they're one of those ones that if a damselfish doesn't defend his territory, they'll come in and munch away all his algae that he's been culturing. So here's one that's working on munching some algae off the surface of the coral here. And in the process, they also eat a lot of coral. And of course, this helps free up space for other organisms and that sort of thing. So they're kind of an important disturbance, in a sense, to the reef, but not on a huge, large scale. But overfishing of parrotfish in areas has created a real problem, because without them grazing, then the algae can take over and kind of overgrow the corals. So they're something that is really needed in an area. Because of their constant grazing and scraping of the algae, A large parrotfish will pass about anywhere from 3 to 5 pounds of coral through its gut per day. So that ends up coming out as basically sand. So when you're in the tropics and you've got these nice white sand beaches, it's made out of coral sand. Around 80% of that is basically parrotfish poop. Coral that has gone through a parrotfish's gut and is now out there as sand. So probably don't want to think about that when you're out there getting yourself buried in sand and whatever, but now it's perfectly clean. So kind of wind up with showing a few of the problems that are going on down there. There's a number of different diseases that affect corals, and so this is an example of a type of fungal infection. So this is a CFAN, this is a healthy part here. This is where the active infection is sort of eating away at the coral fan, and this is where it's kind of been cleaned of its tissue. Another one is what they call a Caribbean white syndrome. So these white patches that you're seeing on these coral heads are a disease that's affecting them. Here is a healthy brain coral. We saw very little brain coral down there because it's one that has been really devastated by a very fast-acting disease that they don't know the cause of. But brain coral heads can get huge and be a couple 100 years old, and if it gets this infection that's been spreading down there, it can kill a huge head like that in just 2 months. So it spreads really fast. Whereas that white one that I showed you on those heads a couple slides back, that is might not kill the coral head, and it spreads very slowly. So there's about a dozen things that are diseases like that are recognized, but in many cases they don't know the actual organism that's causing it. One of the things they're doing is there's a couple fast-growing and used to be common species of corals that are particularly susceptible to this fast-acting disease. And so when they find a specimen that seems to have some resistance to the disease, they'll take pieces of it and attach them to these floating frames of PVC, and they're kind of glued to a little piece of wire here, and they basically culture them until they're a big enough chunk, and then they go out and glue them to the reef to start a new colony. And they keep track of where each one is, so they don't kind of mess up the genetics of things. They keep them straight in that regard. So on one dive, all we did was just go out and volunteered some time to help keep these things clean, because obviously any structure you put in the water starts getting all sorts of stuff, algae and fire corals and all this sort of stuff growing on it. So they gave us little wire brushes, and we would start at the bottom and just work our way up and scrub, cleaning these things off. And that's something that people who are culturing them are basically out there doing every day. So having a bunch of volunteers go out and work it really saves them a lot of time and energy. Back during the COVID shutdowns, you can imagine that was really a lot of work for them to keep up on all of these things without any recreational divers around to help them. So here's Pam working on her one, so each of us was assigned one of them to work over. This was the only time that we wore suits. You know, the water was 84 degrees, so we were able to go without any kind of suit except a swimsuit, obviously. But for this, we wore skins because some of the stuff that we're scraping off, some of the fire corals and things, sting. And so you don't want to sit there scrubbing away and have these little stinging organisms showering down on you. And that is it. So hope you enjoyed the talk, and obviously if you have any questions, you can email them to me, and sign off.